.NET 8 is launching tomorrow. In this video, we're going to look at what is being launched, what the support window looks like for the various versions of .NET that are out there, and why you might want to upgrade. This video is just going to be covering the highlights and won't be a coding video. Those coding videos will start once .NET 8 officially launches tomorrow. However, this will give you a good overview of what's included in the update and what you should be looking out for when upgrading. Now, before we dive in, I want to share a couple of things. First, if you're interested in improving your C# skills, including learning all about this new .NET 8, C# 12, and new Visual Studio stuff, subscribe to this channel. There's going to be a ton of new content coming out for .NET 8 here. Now, second, if you're looking for even more resources or to go deeper into C# and development, check out IamTimCorey.com. I have a whole bunch of courses there, including, as of tomorrow, a new Blazor from start to finish course that covers .NET 8 Blazor. And there's a ton in Blazor. We'll cover that more later. So there's a bunch of stuff there. There's also some free resources on the resources tab, including the C# projects page, my podcast, and much more. So let's jump into what's in .NET 8 and C# 12. Now, first of all, let's go to the details. What's happening? Well, .NET 8, C# 12, and Visual Studio are all being updated as of the 14th of November, which is tomorrow as of this video. So as of tomorrow, .NET 8 gets updated. That's the new, most recent version. Also, with that comes C# 12. And with that comes a new version of Visual Studio for Windows. So those things are both happening. Where is it happening? It's happening on .NET Conf 2023, which is a free online conference. So there is multiple days of content for .NET. You can check it all out online. Microsoft provides all these videos for free to watch. They have keynotes. They have in-depth dives into the various parts of these updates and more. But before we go on, let's talk about the support window for .NET. And it's not just .NET 8, right? We've got, first of all, .NET 5 is no longer supported. We've got .NET 6, and that support ends November 12th of 2024. That's 1 year from this video's launch. Okay, so .NET 6 still has a year of support left. .NET 7, the support for that ends in May of 2024, which is only about 6 more months. Now, why is this? Well, I got a video covering the .NET versions and how they work and all the rest, but the basics are that .NET 6 was a long-term support or LTS version, which means it gets supported for 3 years. The intermediate version, the next version, is a standard term support or STS version of .NET, which means it gets supported for about 1.5 years. So why do we have this support schedule? Well, because there are some people, there's some organizations that want the slower pace of every 2 years they get a new version. But there are other people who want the new stuff right away. And so for those people, they can upgrade every year in November. So November is when the new version of .NET comes out, and they alternate between LTS and STS, which means that .NET 8 is a LTS version, a long-term support, which means support for it will end November 10th, 2026. So that's 3 years from its launch. So if you notice, right now, as of the launch of .NET 8, we will have 3 supported versions of .NET. So .NET 6, we have for another year. .NET 7, we have for another 6 months. And then .NET 8, we have for 3 years. Now, in November of 2024, when .NET 6 goes away, well, we'll get .NET 9. That'll be a standard term support that will have the 1.5 years of support. Okay, so you get to choose. Some people say, well, there's a new version of .NET all the time. It's so fast. Well, not really. It's every 2 years. is what we get the major version. So if you want the major versions, well, that's .NET 6 and .NET 8 and then .NET 10, which means only every 2 years, and they're supported for 3 years, which means, for example, if you're on .NET 6 right now, you have a year where it's supported that you can take to upgrade to .NET 8. So you're able to have a nice window to move to the next version very easily. So that's the support window. It's every 2 years, but if you want to go faster, you can by going every year to the new version. Now, other people might ask, well, but what's the actual production ready? And the answer is every one of these is production ready. When Microsoft releases a new version of .NET, it's production ready. It's supported fully. It is ready to go with a go live license. So yes, .NET 8 is production ready. .NET 7 was production ready when it was released, and so on. Now, they're going to find bugs and they're going to update that for sure. That always happens. But they're all production ready when they launch. These are not like beta versions or anything like that. So let's talk about what's new in these various parts. We're going to start off with C# 12, then we'll go into .NET 8, and then we'll go into Blazor specifically because there's a lot in Blazor. We'll get to that after go through the C# 12 and .NET 8 first. So C# 12. So what is C# 12? It's C#, but there are new things in the language, new ways of doing things in the language that we can take advantage of with the new version of .NET as well. So let's look at these. Now I am going to go fast through because a lot of these that you'll see in the bullet points, these are not all the things, but a lot of these that you see in the bullet points are going to be things that I'll cover in future videos. And I've already recorded quite a few of those, but you'll see even more in the coming days. So we'll talk about a lot of these. And again, this is not a comprehensive list of everything new. If you want everything new, go to the release notes, watch .NET Conf, or watch more of my videos. But let's start with primary constructors. This is a kind of an interesting and unique change to how classes and structs are instantiated, and we'll look at that in more depth. There's also collection expressions. This is fascinating stuff. We're going to have a lot of fun with collection expressions. Default Lambda parameters. We can now have defaults for our Lambda expressions. We can alias any type, not just certain types. So aliasing is going to go a lot further. We can have an experimental attribute. So we can put an attribute over a method that says, hey, this is experimental. So when you go to call it somewhere else, it warns you and says, you're calling an experimental method. So that way you can start building up your library, but yet tell the people who consume your library, hey, we're trying this out, but it's not ready yet, or it might change over time. So that's kind of the new stuff in C# 12. Again, there's more, but those are kind of the top level things that I picked out from C# 12. Now, .NET 8, there's a lot of stuff in here. We're going to go through a lot. So number one, first and foremost, this is a really important thing to note, performance. Every time you upgrade to a new version of .NET 8, your existing code can get faster. Now, not every line of code gets faster, but there are underlying ways that .NET 8 runs the application that will be faster. So just by upgrading to .NET 8, your application will probably perform better. When I talk to people about upgrading their versions of .NET and they ask, well, why would I care? Why would I care to upgrade .NET if it's working today? There's a lot of new features and other stuff that you can talk about, but the number one feature that I talk to every executive about is performance. Because you know what? When your application runs better, runs faster, then it consumes less resources. When that happens, especially if you're in the cloud, you pay less. Either you can support more people on the same hardware, or you can support having the same number of people on smaller hardware, cheaper hardware. So performance is always a big deal, and .NET 8 it's no exception. There's a ton of performance improvements here. And a big one we'll talk more about in a little bit, but is AOT. AOT, the ahead of time compilation that really makes your app smaller and faster and just overall better at performance. In most cases, you have to, there's always an asterisk, but in most cases, AOT is going to make your application better. And so that's a big one, but there's even more underlying things that have been improved to make your application run faster. Now, let's just kind of blow through the rest of these. Serialization improvements, the improvement to system.text.json, there's been a number of improvements there. Improvements to random. There's new ways in random to shuffle and to get random items out of a list. It's really fun and easy to use. Performance-focused types. There's new types in here in .NET that will allow you to more optimize your performance based upon the types that you use. There's improvements to data validation. So there's new ways to validate your data. And it's not just for when you fill out a form, it warns you. It's also for when you have, you're bringing in like a CSV file and you're running it through and validating each of those models to make sure the data that came in is good data. There's new validation helper methods for that. SHA-3 support, which is good for cryptography. Stream-based zip file methods. This is for, you can in C#, I don't know if you know this or not, but you can zip up files in .NET. It's not a .NET 8 specific thing. So you can zip up files. Well, now there's ways to do stream-based zipping and unzipping so that we don't have to save that to the disk, which takes up server resources or computer resources, when we want to put it into a stream instead. So that's a performance improvement. There's also key dependencies for dependency injection. So if you have two different services that use the same interface, you can do that and give each of them a name and then ask for that named dependency. So we'll talk more about that. I've got videos on almost all of these things. So we'll talk definitely about dependency injection improvements. Garbage collection optimizations. This is when when you're on especially if you're deployed in the cloud, maybe a microservice environment, and resources are pretty important, how much you use. Well, with .NET 8, the memory consumption is taken care of by garbage collection. It figures out, okay, we've got this much memory, let's use this much of it, so we don't have to always be collecting all the resources all at once. We can do it on a more relaxed pace. But sometimes you want to use less memory. And so you can tell it, hey, use less memory, and then update that garbage collection cycle so that it takes care of handling that smaller constraint so that it works better in a Kubernetes environment or a microservices environment or wherever you are. Native AOT improvements. There's a lot of AOT improvements, and with that comes console support for AOT in the template. So in the new console template, you get a checkbox that says, hey, do I want to make this an AOT supported console app? So really cool stuff there. There's a simplified build output path. Knowing where your build artifacts are stored is sometimes a moving target depending on what you do in .NET and what version of .NET and all the rest. Now we can simplify and say, this is where the artifacts go, and that makes it a whole lot easier. There's tons of container optimizations. So working with containers is even better. And also, how .NET interacts with those containers is also even better. But we're not done yet. There's also hot reload improvements. So you can do more things in your code without breaking hot reload. And there's WPF hardware rendering over RDP. So when you're using remote desktop protocol for your application, it would, in .NET 7 before, it would use software rendering, but now we can use hardware rendering, which can be much, much more efficient as one of the benefits of WPF normally. Speaking of WPF, WPF also gets the open folder dialog. So this is now a control built into WPF that used to be a third-party only control. So we now get that. .NET Workload Clean. This is a fun one. It allows us to clean up our workload packs that are left over from .NET SDK or Visual Studio updates. So if your computer kind of clogged up with old updates or old versions of these packs, the .NET Workload Clean, that's a command line. You can just run this and it'll clean those up. And there's even a kind of a harsher version of that will clean things up and make sure you only have the ones you need. So that can make our computer better, but it can also fix any kind of weird, quirky bugs you might have on your system. All right. There is a lot. And saying Entity Framework updates is an understatement. There is a whole massive blog post dedicated to all the Entity Framework updates. The big one that a lot of people have been asking for, and it's not a big thing necessarily, but at the same time, a lot of people have been asking for it, date only, time only support comes in this new version of Entity Framework. So there's also JSON columns for SQLite, and there's the SQL Server Hierarchy ID and the raw SQL queries for unmapped types and primitive collection and improved contains and complex types as value objects and so many more things that are in this update. But for sake of time, Entity Framework updates, lots of them. Speaking of sake of time, .NET MAUI updates. Okay. There's a lot of .NET MAUI updates, and we're going to talk more about .NET MAUI specifically, but the big one, the thing they focused on the most was performance improvements and making the current things work better. So that was a big focus in this version for .NET 8. .NET MAUI has had a bit of a reputation for being a little buggy and having some problems. And so they worked very, very hard to make this the stability update, where they made MAUI more stable and more performant. So there's lots of stuff in here for .NET MAUI. And then ASP.NET Core updates. And these aren't even specifically related to Blazor. We're going to have a whole section on Blazor in just a minute, but there's even more ASP.NET Core updates. Minimal API's got a bunch of updates, including the ability to do the form binding and work with anti-forgery tokens when you're posting from a form. Also, AOT, we talked about before, AOT, well, gRPC, minimal API, and services all are now able to do AOT. And you might say, well, why isn't everything able to do AOT? Well, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so those three product types have had that work done, but the third-party dependencies and some other things, working with reflection and other things make it difficult for everything to do, to implement AOT. So that's why not everything has it. Also, there's an overhauled authentication and authorization system that's pretty cool. We'll talk more about that in this next section. So there's a ton of stuff. Those last 3 points especially are just deep, deep wells of content. And if you're going to watch .NET Conf, there's whole sections of videos dedicated to each one of those. So lots of great stuff in .NET 8. Let's talk about Blazor specifically, because half of 3/4 of the updates to ASP.NET Core were about Blazor. Now, you may ask the question before we get started. ASP.NET Core, how does that relate to .NET? Well, ASP.NET Core is a framework that's built on top of .NET. So when we say .NET 8 and we say ASP.NET Core, it's built on top of whatever version of .NET you're using. So this is the .NET 8 ASP.NET Core changes, okay? Now, Blazor is a framework that's built on top of ASP.NET Core. So we're now 3 levels deep. So we got .NET 8, ASP.NET Core, and then Blazor. So it used to be that we had 2 Blazors. Well, technically 3. We had Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, and Blazor Hybrid, which is .NET MAUI, or a part of .NET MAUI. So Now with .NET 8 in Blazor, we have a new mode called server-side rendered, SSR. This is not the same thing as Blazor Server. So server-side rendering, think of this like a completely server-side language. Think ASP.NET Core Razor Pages or MVC or PHP, things of that nature that run fully on the server and then just send down HTML and CSS to the client. They are very, very fast. So this is a new mode with Blazor. It has nothing to do with client side, only server side. So this runs entirely on the server side. It's very, very fast. It's something that the web is built upon. Okay, a lot of the web still runs WordPress. WordPress is server-side rendered. Okay, it's PHP. So now with server-side rendering in Blazor, this kind of takes the place of MVC and Razor Pages. And if you want as a static page, this is a great option. But then they took it a bit further and they added stream rendering and the idea of enhanced forms and navigation. So what is this? Well, it's still server-side rendered pages, but there's a little bit of interactivity. For example, when you post from a form, it doesn't have to reload the entire page like a normal server-side rendered page would be. Instead, it can re-render just part of the page. And it looks a little bit more like a client-side application, even though it's still doing only server-side work. This is what you might see if you use JavaScript to render a part of the page. You haven't gotten into like an Angular, React, and Vue yet. We'll get there. But there's also just the idea of using JavaScript to render a part of a page. And that's what stream rendering is kind of doing. Now, we also have per component rendering modes. So it used to be that when you started a project, you said, I want to use Blazor Server, or I want to use Blazor WebAssembly. And if you're in the web, those are your choices for Blazor. Now, we don't say that. We just say Blazor, and then a per component rendering mode. So we can say, hey, you know what? For the main page, just server-side render, just the server-side stuff. And for the About Us page, same thing. But for the counter page, I want Blazor Server, or I want just Blazor WebAssembly. And when you're not on that page, if you're using Blazor Server for that component, when you're not on that page or component, you don't have to have a connection to open the server. It's only when you're on that component. This allows us to, first of all, only do the extra work for the client-side interactivity when we need to, not for the entire site. And it also allows us to change that per component. So we can make choices on a per component basis instead of a per project basis. And with a server, Blazor Server component, well, that renders very, very fast because most of the work gets done on the server, but then it has an open connection using SignalR back to the server in order to do updates. But a Blazor WebAssembly component doesn't have to have that open connection back to the server, but it has to download all the content to render down to the client, which can be a slow startup time. So that's when Microsoft came up with the idea of auto rendering. And what this allows for is for you to say, hey, this component, instead of being Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly, I want it to be auto. And what auto does is it starts off as Blazor Server because it's very fast to start. But then in the background, it downloads what it needs to turn that component into WebAssembly. And then it will switch over to that WebAssembly version. And now you don't have the need to have the always open connection. So essentially, we get the best of both worlds without having to do anything extra for our component other than saying auto instead of server or WebAssembly. So with all of these new features, this originally is called Blazor United. The concept was, and you may have heard that term, and you're not going to hear that term going forward. Blazor United was just a concept. It wasn't an official Microsoft naming thing. And so when they officially named it, they decided to call it Blazor. And the reason why is because we no longer have to differentiate between all these different types. We just have Blazor, which is why we now have a combined template. We have a Blazor web app template. We don't have a Blazor server and a Blazor WebAssembly. Now there is a standalone Blazor WebAssembly template, but that's because of progressive web apps and having a standalone one. But we have one template that can do all of this. All the first 4 points, it can do it all in one combined template. So that's a nice new feature. We also, you've probably heard of this. We tried to put it in for .NET 7, didn't happen. But for .NET 8, there's now Quick Grid. So this is a really quick grid control. And you may say, well, that's pretty aptly named. It's not designed to be a full grid control. It's designed to have a quick grid that you can throw on the page and do some quick sorting and other things with it. If you want the full featured, you go with a third-party grid system because Microsoft's not in the business of creating all your controls for you. They create the foundation for all of your controls. But this is one that was kind of missing, and so they added it. Also coming in with the new version of .NET 8 is Blazor Identity. This one I love. So if you've ever done the authentication authorizations from Microsoft right in the template with like .NET 6 or .NET 7, you know that when you try to interact with those pages, they're MVC components. And when you try to change how they look, well, you have to override on a per page basis and create those files and override them and then make the changes. And that's kind of a pain. And they're, again, MVC components, not Blazor components. Well, with .NET 8, we now have Blazor components for everything when it comes to identity. The login page, the sign up page, the logout page, the forgot password page, all of those pages, all those components are in the identity system. And they come with it, meaning you don't have to override nor see a particular page. They're already in the template, which means that you can make changes to any of them that you want very, very easily. Now, I've only scratched the surface of all the stuff in Blazor because there's just so much new stuff and so much existing stuff that has been updated or made even better. Quite frankly, when it comes to the web now with C#, Blazor is almost always going to be the right choice. It used to be that you would choose kind of one mode. For example, you might choose Razor Pages. And then you can add in MVC components or Blazor components, but you kind of start with Razor Pages, or you start with MVC and then you kind of add in Razor Pages or Blazor elements, or you start with Blazor, maybe Blazor Server, and then you add in components of other things, but it's kind of one project type that's kind of the foundation of everything. With this new version of Blazor and the combined template, you get to choose as you go. So if you want the server-side rendering only, you can start there. But then if you decide down the road to add a feature that's interactive, we can add it for just that component. And there's no changes to your application. There's no reworking of the structure or adding new ways of doing things. It's all built right in. So you get the choice as you need it. You don't have to rework your ideas or change your philosophies or redo some of the code you've already written. It's all just there and it just works. So changing over time is not only easy, it's advisable. It's the way to build a web application. You don't just have this heavy hand saying, we are going to do this. For example, if you say, we're going to use Blazor WebAssembly, well, now you're committing to, we're going to download the entire site before it gets rendered. This is common for any client-side, fully client-side application like React or Angular as well. So you're committing to that for your entire site. And you're committing to always working through an API. And you're committing to, and then the list goes on of all the things you're committing to up front. Well, with this way of doing things, you're not really committing to anything. You're allowing yourself to have that flexibility even 3 years down the road in building this application. If you want client side 3 years down the road, cool, you can do that. And the changes to your code won't be really necessary at all. You can just say anything new we build, it's going to be client side, or we're going to change the components to be client side. Not only that, you get the best of both worlds when it comes to client side. You get the very fast startup of Blazor server, and then the switch over to Blazor WebAssembly with no connection necessary back to the server in the background. Like, you get the best of both worlds, the fast startup and the no connection to the server necessary. So there's lots of reasons why I think that Blazor is kind of the new choice for web development. That's the overall well-rounded choice. I mean, I am so bought in this. I spent 14 hours on video explaining Blazor and how it works in a new course. I mean, I'm all in on this. We're going to spend a lot more time. We're going to do more courses on Blazor and how to use it in the real world. And we're going to upgrade my my suggestion site to use the new Blazor. We're going to do lots of new work with Blazor because I've always been a fan of Blazor, but this takes it from being good in some circumstances to good in almost every circumstance and faster in most circumstances than the alternatives. So Blazor, it's a pretty awesome choice. I would highly encourage you to learn it for all new web development. Okay, now, how do you learn more about all this new stuff? Well, first, I want to point you to the .NET Conf. Even if you're watching this video and it's over, you can go watch the replays. Microsoft provides the replays for .NET Conf, so check out the replays if you can't watch it live. But if you're watching this the next day or two, check them out live if you can. Check out all the videos. Look at all the different tracks and see what content works for you. What are the things that apply to how you want to learn or what you want to learn, and definitely check those out. Number 2, stay subscribed to this channel. I have got a ton of videos coming out. I've got dozens of videos just on the new .NET stuff. So I'm pumping out a lot of videos, more than usual. Normally I'm twice a week. So Mondays is a coding video, and Thursdays is my dev question video, which is a podcast episode that's also on video. But because of .NET 8 coming out, I'll be putting out videos almost daily, if not daily, for a while to try and get through all of this content and get through all the stuff that is covered and how to use it in the real world. That's my focus, is not just, hey, new and flashy stuff, but here's how you use it in the real world. Here's what's important. Here's what's not. Here's how to avoid the pitfalls, and here's how what the best practices are. So that's what I'm going to cover in the next months as we go through this. We'll also do some real world stuff with this, like building full applications and trying this out in a larger context than just the new stuff. So I encourage you to subscribe to this channel if you aren't already, and keep checking in for new videos as they come. Okay, number 3, I don't push these very often because, quite frankly, I'm not about selling here on this channel. I'm here to kind of help you out. But if you do want to go deeper, I do have the Blazor from start to finish course coming out tomorrow in time for the launch of .NET 8. So this is a .NET 8 Blazor course. It's been fully gone through with everything .NET 8. We cover, everything new. It's a really in-depth course, over 14 and a half hours of content. It's really, I can't recommend it enough. But again, that's a paid course. You don't have to do paid stuff. Again, look at point 1, look at point 2. There's a lot of free content. Don't feel like you have to buy content. Okay. But that paid content funds more free content that I can do. Okay. And number 4, this is the most important one. Okay. So number 4, the most important thing is practice. Okay. It's not about what you watch. It's not about what you buy. It's not about, having consumed content. Consuming content is not the same as learning content. I want to see you actually be able to put things into practice. So actually build stuff. Try it out. Because when you build stuff, that's when it really sinks in. That's when you kind of figure out what you missed in the content. Maybe you saw a video and you thought you saw all the steps, but you missed one and you didn't realize it. When you go to build something, that's when you find the missing step. That's when you figure out, ooh, this doesn't work the way it did in the video. What did I miss? And you really solidify all those steps and figure out how to make this actually work. This is why employers ask for work experience. They want to know that you've actually practiced what you've learned, that it's not just book knowledge, but it's actually real world knowledge by actually having done something. So the way to simulate that is to practice, build applications. They don't have to really do anything. You don't have to build a full start to finish application. You just need to build something that can show off the new stuff, something that you can try out to figure out how the new stuff works. So if you don't have any other ideas, watch my videos on this channel and watch what I do these things and then do the same thing or do something similar to practice the new stuff and see how it works. That will really improve your skills much, much faster than if you just watch videos. All right, that's it for now. Like I said, this is just a high-level overview. There is a ton of stuff coming for .NET 8 and C# 12. I encourage you to check it all out, put it on your training list, figure out which things you want to learn in what order, and then look for that content here on this channel or on the .NET Conf channel as well. All right, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.